You'll grab a seat. I would like to call to order the regular Planning Commission meeting for Monday, May 6, 2019. Kathleen, could you give us a roll call? I see an empty seat at the end. Let's see if we got enough people.
Commissioner Hill?
Here.
Commissioner Marks?
Here.
Commissioner Mazza?
Here.
Chair Euring?
Here.
You have a quorum with Vice Chair Jennings absent.
Okay, and just for Jeff was kind enough, he told us he wasn't going to be here tonight, so it's not really a surprise. Charles, could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Could we get a approval of the agenda, please?
I move the agenda as staff recommends.
We have had a request from the applicants at 5C to move that to
May 20th.
May 20th.
Okay, I move the agenda with 5C moved to May 20th. May I ask first, isn't that Nobu Soho night?
Yes.
Oh, it's going to be Halloween.
No.
That's, I believe it's just Nobu on May 20th.
Still going to be a great meeting.
So you want to
There will be a
combine
lot
them?
to talk about.
Do you want to combine them, or do you want to pick another date? That seems like a lot.
For that meeting, we have, at this time, we have 3 septic administrative coastal development permits and 2 public hearings and the Nobu item.
Okay, then I would like to request another date for 5C.
That's not necessarily a huge agenda.
Okay.
I mean, whatever the commissioners would like to do.
I'd rather put 5C off to a less busy night.
Depends what those 2 items are.
Well, one of them's Nobu.
Well,
No, one of them is a new single-family house, and the other one is, I'm not sure what the other one is.
Well, let me ask this question. I mean, Nobu appears, we have had a variety of discussions with them. Do you think you'll have some kind of resolutions coming before us at that meeting, or what do you anticipate? Or can you anticipate, or do you want to anticipate?
It's hard to anticipate right this minute,
Okay.
but it's not necessarily going to
Be a
I
long
wouldn't
drive.
expect it to be a huge, long thing.
Let it go, John. We'll see.
Would it make sense to hear this one then and push the Nobu off in hopes that maybe there's more certainty about it?
No.
Okay.
Let's just let them go and see what happens. You know, we're good. We can handle this.
We could always continue something.
You guys are good.
Let me ask you this. Is Nobu going to be first or last? Because there's probably going to be public participation.
Nobu, well, I mean, you can organize the agenda however you want, but
Okay.
it would be towards the end of the agenda just based on the category.
Okay, I move staff's recommendation with 5C moved to May 20th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Done. Kathleen, could you tell us about the report on posting the agenda?
The agenda for this meeting was properly posted on April 26, 2019.
Okay, thank you very, very much. The ceremonial presentations, an update on the Woolsey fire. Richard, I think that's you.
Good evening, Chair Euring and members of the Planning Commission. I'd like to give you a quick update since our last meeting. And then after we go through this, there was a question that you had at the last meeting, not the last meeting, which was the school board, school issue, but the one before that. You had a question about the water department, so I'll speak to that at the end.
Yeah, that was Jeff's question, I believe. Okay.
So far we've issued, from the date of the fire, we've issued 29 temporary housing permits. As we've discussed before, it's not necessarily a permit. This is not the final step to put a trailer on your property or some form of temporary housing. It's one step towards getting there. You need to go to building and safety first. before that structure could be placed on the property, but we've issued 29 approvals through the planning department. A total of 86 planning verifications have been applied for and granted. 9 of those are for in-kind replacement. The amount of administrative plan reviews is relatively consistent. It's been 14, 2 of which would have been approved. We're finding that the holdup with these, and we're working with it, is just getting the folks through the fire department. And we are working with them. Soon there'll be another one to be added to that list. We found out today they were able to complete what the fire department needed in terms of water flow. So we'll have another one to add to that for an in-kind replacement of a single-family residence. The statistics here are for the purposes of talking about the debris clearance. Of those who have entered into the local program, 16 properties have completed their debris clearance, 53 are ready for inspection, and a total of 94 are either still undergoing the process or they've asked for an extension. But some of those 94 are in their active permits. The state has cleared 42 properties, and as I mentioned last time, the number still stands at 2 for non-responsive properties. In terms of what's entered plan check, the numbers are relatively the same. We've only have 2 single-family homes that are undergoing construction. The permits have been issued. No new permits from the Building and Safety Department have been issued. It's still a matter of these homes are still going through the plan check process where their structural engineering has been approved or is being reviewed and waiting for approval, and that's 9 single-family homes. So hopefully next time I see you, some of that is moved. But this is a process by which the city typically responds within a matter of weeks, if not 1 week, and then it's a matter of waiting for the applicants' engineers to come up with responses and get those engineers back so that the checker can look at it again. Would like to remind people that if they would like to set up an appointment to go over their project, if they have questions about how many square feet they have on the property or locations of buildings, our planner, Shweta Sharma, can help them. We have our email up here, but if you come to City Hall, we can set up an appointment at the fire rebuild table, or if you have enough materials, whoever comes in, we can just sit down with them right at that time and try to help them out to give them some guidance. The county still has a debris removal operations center open on the other side of the hill from us in Calabasas, and we still have a presence by the LA County Fire Department on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 8 in the morning until 12, and we recommend that folks take advantage of that. It saves them from going over the hill, and it is somebody who is one of the counter staff from the fire department. They can answer questions about water flow and access to the property. And the fire department, on that note of access, if there is a question about access to your property, they have been doing site visits to visit properties to see if, say, a 12-foot or 15-foot wide access is appropriate instead of just the standard 20-foot wide access. Some upcoming events at the city is we have 3 classes that you need to attend all 3 if someone's interested. It's for a community emergency response team training. The CERT program, that's something that has been active for years. There are a number of CERT-trained individuals currently, but this would be to expand that number. If anyone is interested, they should contact us here at City Hall and we can get them the necessary paperwork so they can get enrolled for those classes. And on May 15th, there is going to be a rebuilding resilience workshop at City Hall as well. And once again, this is a list of resources that are online for folks to use undergoing the rebuild process. All of this can be found at the city's website, which is malibucity.org. And if you simply type in rebuilding or Woolsey Fire, it will take you to a page with all of these links. And at our last meeting, Commissioner Jennings had some questions about the fees that were being charged by the water district. And I wanted to know if there was a fee to turn the water back on. The water district did turn off water service to the fire damaged properties. If that is the case for your property, you can give a call. They'll turn the water back on for free. There is no charge for that. The fees that you can expect would be if, say, you wanted to change out your water meter, you're building a bigger home. So now you needed a larger meter than what you had before. The water district informed us you would be required to pay the difference between the two meters for the upgrade. And in some neighborhoods, there have been upgrades that have taken place to the water system and the facilities in your neighborhood. And what's expected of folks that are rebuilding, whether it be fire rebuilds or just a rebuild of a home or remodel of a home, it's whenever someone does any work to their property, the water department looks for the homeowner to pay into their share of what those upgrades to the facilities cost. And so it varies, but it would be best for anybody with questions to go to the water department. And that would be the only fee really associated with putting your home back. If you kept the same size meter, it would be the upgrade to the equipment.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Any questions, commissioners?
Yeah, Richard, you said that 9 out of 86 were in-kind permits that have been given?
I think that was, I noticed that too. I think all of those are like-for-like replacements, and then 9 of those, this is on your statistics, Richard, I think 9 of them are actually in plan check. Is that what? You want to go back to that slide, maybe?
The very first slide. Maybe it's the second.
Yeah, the PVs, you were talking about 86 have been approved and 9, are only 9 of them in-kind replacements? Oh, your mic's not on.
9, and that's a typo on our part. 9 of those are in plan check. Let's move over 2 slides. And you see it there, the second item down, single-family rebuilds, 9.
Okay, so are any of those 86 for bigger houses above the 110%?
Yes, some of those are going to be for a 10% increase if the property could do the 10% increase.
No, I mean, are there any of them that are like 200% increases?
No, those would not be. You can't get anything more than 10% with a planning verification.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Hill?
Oh, just out of curiosity, what ratio are asking for the extra 10%? Most all of them, or?
It is a majority, yes.
Commissioner Marks?
No, nothing more.
Thank you, Richard. I'm not sure you're going to be able to answer this evening, but you're probably in touch with other communities that have had the same kind of impact from a fire. And I'm just wondering, in terms of the number of people that have come forward to get their house in the process, right, to come back and try and rebuild, as you sort of move down the line, maybe sometime in the future, give us a perspective that says, based upon the number that have come forward versus the number that we've got out there, it looks like we're moving in a direction that says, the majority are going to try and rebuild, 50% are going to try and rebuild. And like I said, there may be some guidelines we can get from other cities that have done this that you're talking to. They can help us answer that question. This is more of like just a general information thing to try and figure out what the hell's going on out there. Okay.
We could also let you know, if it's interesting to you, the rate at which the rebuilds occurred after, say, the 93 fire. That was something we were interested in too, in terms of preparing our staffing and stuff. Are we going to get our, have in the past, did we have a flood of everybody coming all at once, or was it kind of spread over?
Well, I think, look, this thing could dramatically change the city. So I think the more we can sort of get a view of what's going on, if there are steps that we should take, not us, maybe the city council should take, I think it's important for them to get that heads up and at least start thinking about that stuff versus wait until we get to the end and find out that everybody's bolted and nobody's building anything. So, okay. Oral and written communication from the public is next. So, Richard, thank you very, very much. I do appreciate your help. Thanks, Richard. Okay, we've got 3 speakers. Pat Healy, you are first. You've got 3 minutes to talk on any topic that isn't on the agenda. Talk about John's shirt.
Okay. Good evening, commissioners. First of all, I want to thank Bonnie and Jessica for all their hard work with Edison to get an acceptable vegetation management plan for the city. And I would, if Bonnie's able to do it tonight, I'd like her to give us an update on what's happening so far. And we have the following questions. Has Edison abandoned its position that it has the right to cut anything within a 12-foot radius of their lines? And is it true that Edison will be, most of their work will be the same as they've done in the past? We also want to know what the city's position is on allowing cuts of branches of more than 2 inches in diameter, and is the CDBP required for that? Or, and is it for both native and non-native trees? And we're concerned as to how major vegetation removal is actually defined, and what's the difference between that and heavy trims? And when is the CDP required? So if Bonnie is able to answer those questions as well as give you an update, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Paul Grisanti, you're up next. Paul will be followed by Neil Witt. So Neil, if you come up, grab a seat in front so you can, and then Graham, you'll be following him. Go ahead, Paul.
Greetings, Chair Euring and staff and commissioners. I just wanted to be here and congratulate the Planning and Building and Safety Departments, because today I went down Doom Drive and I saw some actual wood in the air. So now I'm a little depressed because I didn't see a permit for it, but for God's sake, don't look at it too closely. No, but they're actually working really hard to make people get a permit within 6 months, and stuff is happening. And as long as they continue to be friendly and helpful to people, we may get out of this alive. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Neil.
My name is Neil Witt. I lived on Cuthbert Road. Okay, I'd like to thank you. I have the debris removal start today, so I beat your estimate. My question was, I was at one council meeting when Skylar Peak said that the permit process should be 75% or 100%. So I'm not really positive on that deal. And then my next question is, if you're building like for like, will you be able to carry your tax base of the Proposition 13 of 1% to your new house? And that's it.
Those are questions that nobody's ever asked before.
That's what everybody keeps telling me.
Thank you very much. Graham, you're up next.
Steve, I put 2A on there, but I wanted to actually talk on 5C, but I gather that's been...
5C's been postponed.
So you can take me off.
You're off, okay, you're off the list. All right, very good. Commissioner comments.
I just wanted to answer Mr. Witt on part of this. Is he still here?
Yes.
Yeah. Tomorrow, the A&F committee meets. I think it's at 10 o'clock.
Tell them what A&F stands.
Administrative and Finance.
Go ahead.
And they're going over the budget. Part of that discussion will be whether it's 75% or 100%. Apparently, and I don't know if Trevor wants to get into this, apparently there's some legal stuff involved in making it 100%. So they've recommended 100% unless they have to do 75. Now that's just a subcommittee, so the regular council meeting will take it up at the budget hearing. As far as the Prop 13, I believe you get to carry it over, but I'm not a lawyer. And then I might as well comment. Bonnie, I keep reading in the paper that Whole Foods is going to open early January, June, I mean. And I go by there and they're putting some green stuff on the wall, but it's not even close to what's required. And I just wondered if they're gonna be able to open without at least getting half of it up.
Like any applicant, the project will have to meet all of the permit conditions. Like many projects, landscaping takes a while to fill in. So I haven't been on the site yet. I don't know what the circumstances are, but we'll be doing a final inspection before they get the okay to open and everything and make sure all the conditions are met. So far, they've been very cooperative about meeting all their conditions. We haven't had any pushback on anything.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hill?
Yeah, three things. In response to Pat, I too would like to hear something from Bonnie about the trees, and it seemed like we were going in the right direction with the CDPs, and then I saw a letter last week that made it sound like the definition of major vegetation was getting narrower again somehow. And it seems like it's the 2-inch limbs roughly that should be of concern, that are growing faster and whipping around in the wind more, whereas now I see talking about 7-inch limbs, those are going to be relatively static even in like hurricane force winds and are growing much more slowly. So I don't understand why that definition has to be that wide of a limb. So maybe you can clarify some of that. Secondly, after last month, Craig Lapsley, the former head of the emergency management of Victoria, Australia, came and spoke about lessons from Australia, fire stuff. And I had some conversation with him afterwards, and he sent me a link to an information sheet online that shows Victoria's road closure plan. It's a 5-level plan depending on the severity of the incident, and ranging from emergency personnel only through intermediate levels of qualified, capable residents who have equipment and gear and communication devices, down through finally full open. And they have found that having the 5-tiered program has been really helpful in administering these events at roadblocks. And I showed this to Lieutenant C2 a couple weeks ago, and she thought it was really interesting, so I just wanted to let you guys know that she is reacting positively to this. And one of the things they do, if you have ID and you're approved for the particular level of entry, they can give you a wristband, so that then when you come to a roadblock again, you just show your wristband and you're good to go. And I think she kind of liked that idea too. So, well, there may be something constructive out of that. And then finally, I was apprised by Hans Letz that in Oxnard this past week, the former natural gas peaker plant at Mandalay Bay is being converted to a mega battery and solar panel installation that will generate 400 megawatts. And to put that in perspective, that's like roughly back of the envelope, like 8 or 10 Malibus, just from electricity demand from that one site. And I and we and he had the notion that, you know, we've talked about little microgrids in town for emergency flexibility and being able to shut certain parts on and off, and having backup power during a fire. And if they can get that kind of power on one site in Oxnard, maybe there could be 5 sites in Malibu that would serve the 10 grids that could be switched on and off interchangeably. So that's something to be looking at down the line. And I just sort of as an aside on that, I found it was very interesting that that peaker plant was where the Cabrillo Port natural gasification facility was to come ashore about 15 years ago when that proposal came through. And I went back and looked at that, and I found a historical narrative of the document, and was sort of amused to find that they said Malibu wasn't responding at first because nobody here cared, or they thought it was all in Oxnard, and they said that I was actually the first person to respond, and then Steve was the very second to bring it up to the city, so that was entertaining. But the point, I think, is that had we not fought for that then, we wouldn't have had the land available now to turn it into this more progressive, renewable energy source. So it's kind of a lesson about how land use decisions have consequences and about not rushing to foreclose potentially better options, like, for example, putting the fire station right in the middle of the property that we just got. Let's, not foreclose that option so quickly. And, maybe where they're talking about putting campsites in the hills, maybe those would be good spots to put in solar panels and batteries. That's my comment.
Can I ask a question?
Commissioner Hill, thank you.
How many hundred acres of solar panels are involved?
Well, I don't know the size of the site itself, but it's not vast. And if we were talking about facilities that might be, a tenth of the size or even less than what's at Mandalay Bay, that would be a relatively self-contained, I think just like a power regeneration station kind of scale.
Commissioner Marks.
Just to add on what Craig brought up, Commissioner Hill brought up, I should say. The only observation I'd make is that Oxnard has an advantage because they're in an opportunity zone as deemed by this new tax law. So they'll have benefits for tax code that we might not be able to compete with in terms of being able to use land in that same way. But concept makes a lot of sense. So, but that's probably why that investment's going in right there. So,
Cool. Thank you, Commissioner Marks. Thank you. Okay, a couple things. Pat, I'll let Bonnie respond, but I asked myself the same questions this afternoon when I was getting ready for the meeting, and on the city website, there's a big write-up that answers probably 3/4 of the stuff you asked. So I'll bet Bonnie can address that as we go along. Tree trimming, one question I do have is that it mentioned in there that Southern California Edison had given you a plan that says, here are the trees we're going to trim when they go through the streets. Think about putting that on the website so that the neighbor could at least look at it. If they got a problem ahead of time, they could yell versus.
Yeah, at this point, we have that information in a latitude, longitude format, which isn't helpful to the regular person, but we're working on getting that in a better format.
Cool, okay. Whole Foods, in one of the prior meetings, I talked about the fact that when the planning department and Craig George's department go through and sign off on all the things, that somebody's got to check off all the boxes. And I said I'd like to get a list of that check off. I mean, how do I do that? Do I make a formal request for that, or how does that work?
I'd be happy to work with you on
Cool.
that information. We can, the approved resolution is obviously a public record, and
So we'll talk before then.
Yeah.
That's excellent, okay? Last item, and this is for the school people, all right? Last week, we had the Point Dume School and the joining Point Dume and Juan Cabrillo. And one of the things that was in the staff report was that in 1998, Juan Cabrillo and Point Dume had a total enrollment of 750 students. As of last year, that total enrollment was down to 325. And that's expected to drop until 2030. And the staff report never said if that was going to be the low point or how fast it was going to ramp back up. Now, subsequent to that, in this week's paper, or sometime this week, there was another article that talked about the fact that California growth rates are flat, right? I mean, there's nothing going on. Then there was another article that came out this week that said that the high school 11-man football team had been reduced to an 8-man football team, and that there are only, I think, two freshmen came out for the team, and there's only 60 kids in, was it 8th grade or 9th grade, whatever grade it was. So the point is this, okay? Two things. One, if the school people don't start thinking about what's going to happen if we have all these short-term rentals going on, if all these houses that are burnt out are turned into short-term rentals, you'll be able to put all the kids that need education in Malibu in a bus and drive them around the city, all right?
Probably a van.
Or a van or whatever it's supposed to be. I mean, we've got to build this community back up with residences and people who have kids. Otherwise, this school is not going to go anyplace. And the second thing is, the school district, their plan has been one of these, if you build it, they will come, right? So they're going to want to build this grand school, and I don't have a problem with that. I mean, I think education is the right thing to do. However, I would suggest somebody rethink that, and the process has said start building in phases. Let's get some schools in place so we can start educating some kids, because if we don't do that, more and more people will leave, and we'll end up with a school with nobody in it. one man's editorial comment. So thank you very much, Bonnie. It's up to you.
I did want to add one other thing, just in terms of if you could put up the lat long, at least you can do a search and it'll come up right with a pin on the map. So at least people could start to research as it's getting prepped.
Did you have any other, did you make comments already, Commissioner Marks?
Yes.
You did already, okay. Good evening, everybody. I just want to make a couple of announcements, and then I'll give you an update on what we know about Southern California Edison's tree vegetation or vegetation management program. First, I am happy to introduce you to 2 new planning staff members that joined the planning department in March. So we have Philip Coronel, who is one of our new planning technicians, and we have David Ng, who is a new assistant planner. We are very happy to have them. They're doing great, and you will see them here presenting things to you.
Gentlemen,
very
glad to have you.
Welcome, guys.
Enjoy that applause. You don't get that.
Let's see. I also wanted to mention that on Monday at the City Council meeting, there are a couple of items that might be of interest to people that watch Planning Commission meetings. One is an item that the planning staff will be presenting on primary view determinations in the burn areas. We've had a number of requests for primary view determinations to be made over areas that are burned, and we're asking for the City Council to provide direction to us on that. Establishing a PVD over these artificial conditions is kind of setting a strange baseline for view preservation in those circumstances. So if you're interested in that issue, that will be on Monday night. Also, Southern California Edison will be making a presentation to the City Council in some detail about the vegetation removal or management program. So I recommend tuning in for that. And then also, for anyone interested in the Civic Center wastewater facility project, the Phase 2 work, as far as design and planning, is beginning, and there's an item about how properties can be added or not to Phase 2 if they weren't originally included there. So those are 3 items I wanted to mention.
Commissioner Mazza, I think you also had a question for me, something about the 75 versus 100%. I wasn't sure what legal issue you're referring to, but it could be the gift of public funds issue. But I don't think that was going to be determinative of whether it was the 75 or 100% of the fees for like or like plus 10% was going to be reimbursed. I think the city was going to analyze the impacts of doing that.
Well, I just caught it tangentially in the discussion on the city council. So you know a lot more than I do.
But if anyone's interested in that, they should show up at the meeting and then at the city council meeting coming up.
Is that the budget meeting?
Yeah, there'll be a budget meeting, and I think it's a separate item about the fees.
The budget meeting, there's a kind of a regular fee schedule item on Monday's council meeting, but that I think is primarily about any new fees and cost of living adjustment type things.
I don't think they're dealing with the
No, they're not dealing with the
item.
waiver at that time. It'll be at a later budget meeting.
Right.
Okay?
And then
I'm sorry.
also wanted to mention the California Coastal Commission will be considering 2 city items at their meeting this Thursday in Oxnard. So that's Thursday, May 9th. One is the local coastal program public access map update that we've been trying to get accomplished for a long, long time. We had it before City Council last fall, I think, and the commission is now, and the council has signed off on that version. So the commission is now considering it. They will also be considering the kind of final piece to enact the city's latest housing element update. The municipal code part of that's already been approved, and so this would bring the local coastal program up to date with that. And now finally, let's see, I think we are to the Southern California Edison update. As Commissioner Euring mentioned, there is quite a bit of information that's been added to the city's website. Also, there's information on Edison's website. But the city has added a lot of information to kind of explain where we're at with Edison in terms of wrapping our arms around this program. We have worked with them on determining that they have mandates for achieving certain clearances from power lines. We have our local coastal program, and then on top of that, there are regulations that protect nesting birds at the state and federal level. So we're trying to balance all of those things and make sure that our environment is protected and they are able to keep the community safe from fire hazards related to trees and vegetation and power lines. So where we're at today is that we had to determine what triggers, what type of vegetation removal on trees would trigger a coastal development permit. There are terms like major vegetation removal that are part of the Coastal Act and trigger a coastal development permit, but that's not actually defined. And so in looking at the routine maintenance that Edison's been doing every year for whoever knows how long, that we used as part of our threshold for what would indicate major vegetation removal. So where Edison has trimmed back to every year, that would be considered repair and maintenance under the utility exemptions for a coastal development permit under the Coastal Act. And this is with respect to native trees, the 5 native trees that are protected in the city's LCP. So where Edison is trimming back beyond that and affecting branches bigger than 7 inches in diameter, that's what the term heavy trimming is in Edison's lingo. Heavy trims that affect native trees or cutting back on a native tree beyond the cut line from previous years, that's when we're going to review it for a coastal development permit. So we've laid all those parameters out with Edison. And so that, let's see, that, and if there's any work in ESHA. So we're working with them on that. Let's see, the city has hired a consulting arborist to work with us and help us oversee Edison's work, while the city biologist and the rest of us know quite a bit about native trees and vegetation, this type of thing, we really wanted to have an expert to be able to advise us. And so we've got an expert on board now. Let's see, what else? Has Edison abandoned its position that it has the right to cut anything within a 12-foot radius? Well, let me start with the first question. Has Edison said that most of their work will involve working within the same radius as previous years? The answer to that is yes. And they are providing us a list that I mentioned earlier of all of the trees that they have inspected as part of their pre-inspection surveys. So they're identifying all of the native trees that they anticipate heavy trims or trims beyond the previous year's cut line. And so we will be able to review those with them in advance for, or removals for processing a CDP. And when those come up, they will have to skip those. We'll deal with the CDP and then they'll come back to it later. And then same with nesting birds. They have biologists that conduct nesting bird surveys in accordance with all the protocols, which, you know, is just a few days before the trim work actually happens. So you can't do it like 3 weeks in advance because then all kinds of things can happen between then and the work getting done. So they do that, and if active nests are found, then they establish the required buffers and avoid that tree in that area until the birds have fledged, and so they're following all those normal protocols. So in terms of schedule, the first area that they're beginning is the Bonsall Canyon area. That will start on Wednesday. We're going to meet in the field with them, with our new arborist, and everybody's going to, observe, and we're going to watch closely as they begin. They're starting slowly so that we can kind of work through all of the issues, and if we need to modify the program that we've got worked out so far, we will do that as we go. But so far, everyone seems to be on the same page We have a cooperative relationship. I know there's a lot of anxiety in the community. We're listening to that, and we're going to keep a very close eye on things, and Edison knows that. And so I'm confident that we'll reach a good place with this.
Bonnie, thank you very much. John, go ahead.
You mentioned just native trees. Can they whack anything they want that isn't native?
I just got ice in my mouth, I'm sorry. That was not good. If they're doing heavy work on non-native trees, we've asked them to review that with us also. And we know there's a concern about monarch butterfly habitat, and so we're working on making sure that we can avoid that as well. And also, the thing we have to keep in mind is that if a regular homeowner wanted to come in and remove a non-native tree out of their yard, there would be no particular permitting requirement associated with that other than, the nesting bird concerns. So we're obligated to treat Edison in the same way. So in terms of when removal of native trees becomes, a major vegetation removal, we're looking at that in terms of when we're talking about a large amount of trees and all in one place.
Okay, and another question on a different subject. I've been reading in a couple places lately, which I can't remember where they were, that the Coastal Commission and the county are considering letting the county LCP have camping in H1. Is the city doing anything about that? Are they going to comment?
There's an item on the city council's agenda. I think Councilmember Farrer asked to have it considered by the council to send a letter of objection regarding that issue to the county.
Thank you.
There's one question that Pat asked that I forgot to answer about cuts of branches more than 2 inches. That is a standard that's in the county's LCP. It doesn't exist in the city's LCP, and so we don't have a basis for setting that as a threshold for requiring a CDP for trimming, especially since Edison's been maintaining these trees to a certain point every year. All of a sudden asking for a CDP at this point it's hard to justify that. So we're watching this carefully as we get started, and we'll make adjustments if we need to.
Bonnie, you've also been in communication with them about what people can do if they don't like what SCE is proposing to do to trees on their property?
Right. Yeah, and I haven't really spoken to that, but SCE has a pretty extensive property owner notification process for removals and where heavy work is proposed. And so their inspectors make contact with property owners by leaving a door hanger and actually knocking on the door when they do these pre-inspections 30 to 45 days in advance, and then again much closer to the date the actual work is going on. And they work with the property owner to explain what they feel the need is for the trimming or the removal, and they try to work towards an agreement with the property owner where the property owner is comfortable giving consent to do the work, for Edison to do the work. If the property owner feels like they're not, getting a response from Edison, or they don't know who to contact, or they, would like some sort of input from the city on how to work through the problem, a property owner can certainly contact us, and we'll see what we can do.
Okay, Commissioner Hill?
3 quick ones, I think. I think you said that the definition of heavy trim would include cuts beyond the cut line on natives from previous years cut lines. Okay. And I read in a letter about a definition of major vegetation for non-natives being groves, and I wondered what a grove, is that 3 trees, or is there a?
That's one of these, in discussing that question with Edison, our concern would be where they would be, there's not, the short answer is there's not a specific number or threshold, and this is one of these things we're gonna try to feel out as we go. Edison's representative, who will be doing the presentation on Monday, Dave Guzman, indicated that it's very unusual for them to be looking to remove an entire, group of trees. And most likely, it would be a situation where a property owner was requesting that. And Edison is usually, doesn't have any issue with that. And so I indicated that we would want to know about that in advance and make sure that there's not a habitat issue there or something that would, trigger some sort of an adverse, biological reaction from that sort of thing.
I have a neighbor that has 3 eucalyptus right in a line under the line, and in past years, they've trimmed it to 4, and that's okay, but to get more than 4, I think they'll have to cut those trees down. So that may be a
Okay.
grove, or I don't know.
I guess we'll see.
And then maybe they'll answer this when they come, but if the owner says, no, I don't want them cut, and Edison says, okay, well, here's a waiver that we want you to sign, and the owner still doesn't want to sign, what happens in that end game?
Well, Edison they have an obligation to maintain public safety, and so it's probably a better question for them to answer next week, but they try to work through a solution with the property owner.
Commissioner Marks, anything?
Nothing additional now.
Bonnie, thank you very much. That was a long, you did good. All right, we are moving for the consent calendar, which we do not have one tonight. There's no continued public hearings. So we're gonna move on to the new public hearings, item 5A, which is a coastal development permit, amendment number 18006, site plan review number 19016, extension number 19002, an application to amend a coastal development permit number 11056 to allow for additional grading, reduce the size and location of the garage, relocation of the previously approved on-site wastewater treatment system, and addition of a basement and a 2-year extension of a coastal development permit number 11056 and a site plan review number 11029 and 16010 for 24157 Malibu Road. And we have, let me just see what we've got. This is all the applicant team. Charles and Lucy? Yeah, on the applicant team? Both of you guys, okay? And we've also got Jake Holt on the applicant team, all right? And then we've got one other speaker, Sarah Wan. So the applicant goes first. They get 15 minutes, Trevor? Yep. Okay, so.
But first, your staff report.
Oh, excuse me. I did not mean to ignore you. Staff report, please.
And disclosures also.
And disclosures. Let's do disclosures first. Go ahead, John. Or it's Commissioner Hill, you go first.
Well, let's see. I walked the site. I saw no story poles. I did notice the contours of the historical landslide. That was good to appreciate. I learned the driveway is only 15 feet wide, and had some discussion with Richard about the actual square footage of the parcel, which seems a little bit fuzzy, but maybe mostly resolved. We'll see.
Okay.
That's it.
Commissioner Mazza.
I talked briefly to Sarah Wan on the phone, less than a minute. Then I met with the applicant, Sarah Wan, at the property on Friday with Commissioner Euring. Didn't learn anything that wasn't in the staff report.
Commissioner Marks.
I had a call with the applicant, Steve Montoya, just talking through the project. Didn't learn anything new during that call. Did a site visit, kind of walked above the property, didn't see the story poles either, and didn't learn anything new during that visit.
As Commissioner Mazza mentioned, we met with the applicant, Sarah Wan, at the property last Friday. Got a look at the site, didn't learn anything was in the staff report. So with that, you're on.
Good evening, Commissioners. The item before you tonight is an amendment to a CDP approved in 2016, including an SPR for remedial grading and an extension for the original CDP. This is a map of the project site, and we'll get a little bit into this lot area discrepancy in a minute. But it's on the land side of Malibu Road, and to the north and the west are Malibu Bluff Park and the Crummer site, and to the east are other single-family homes. There was some concern about discrepancy between the lot area stated on the site survey and what the tax assessor shows online. And it was determined that the difference is that the tax assessor did not include this area in green, which would extend the length of the property. But I zoomed in here to just show you these 3 lines. That whole area was not included by the tax assessor, but was correctly included by the site survey. They found an iron monument to indicate the property boundaries. The previously approved project CDP 110456 approved a new 10,680 square foot single family residence with a detached garage, a little over 6,000 square feet of crawl space, a new OWTS and abandonment of the existing on-site wastewater treatment system, almost 1,000 cubic yards of non-exempt grading, almost 20,000 square feet of impermeable surface, landscaping, a new pool, barbecue area, and retaining walls. That approval also included a site plan review for construction in excess of 18 feet in height to allow for a pitched roof up to 28 feet, and a site plan review for remedial grading as well. The amendment reduces the amount of crawl space and adds a 2,000 square foot basement. It decreases the first and second level TDSF by almost 500 square feet, decreases the size of the garage, relocates the garage, decreases the amount of impermeable surface, decreases the amount of non-exempt grading, relocates the on-site wastewater system to behind the residence, revises some of the landscaping, and increases the remedial grading from 830 cubic yards to 10,608 cubic yards. It also includes the areas required for biofiltration and realigns the driveway a little bit. This does also include a site plan review for the amount of remedial grading and includes an extension of 2 years for the approval of the CDP, the original CDP. This is a somewhat fuzzy site plan overlay showing the original CDP that was approved, and the items lined in red are the changes with the proposed amendment. The items in blue are the proposed bioretention facilities. As you can see, the driveway has been realigned and extended. That red square on the lower right-hand corner of the site plan is where the garage is going to go. Some of the primary residence structure has been reduced, and you can see that again in the red lines, and the OWTS has been relocated to that red rectangle in the rear of behind the property. This is showing the new basement plan. The items in red are the original plan for the crawl space, and kind of that central rectangular area is where the new basement is proposed. And then you can see some extension of that area on the eastern side of the plan. The site plan review for the remedial grading reflects some corrections from the original CDP. The new civil engineering and the grading plans now account for the certified subgrade, foundation excavations, those required bioretention areas, and the correct amount of mitigation for the existing geologic and geotechnical hazards, including that historically active landslide area. The quantity changes increase, as discussed previously, the total amount of remedial grading and the total amount of understructure excavation needed, but it does decrease the amount of safety grading and non-exempt grading, and compared to the original CDP, decreases the total amount of imported fill. Staff recommends the adoption of resolution number 1932, approving this CDP amendment, including the site plan review for remedial grading and the extension of the original CDP.
Justine, thank you very much. Let's go to public comment. The applicant team is up first. Charles, you want to start, or?
Good evening, Chair Euring and Commissioners. We were hired about 2 years ago by the owner. They had planning commission approval, and they needed a team to help them get through the building and safety stage. And so we started, and we brought in LC Engineering. They do a lot of work here in the city. And we started studying the grading plans and realized that the grading plan was not accurate, the previous one that was prepared by KPFF. And we tried very hard to make the grading quantities work. A lot of meetings, a lot of back and forth with Jake Holt, the project geologist. We also had a structural engineer hired to help us. And at the end of the day, we met with Richard and the city geologist, Christine, and we came up with the best design that we could, and that's the plan before you. And that's the correct grading that's needed to mitigate the landslide and get this property back in order. That being said, the client decided, he's gonna have to go through this amendment process, and he wanted to relocate the garage, a smaller garage, and add a basement, and he reduced one of the accessory structures or parts of the residence, and that changed a couple of courtyards. But those revisions in totality were small. The major issue was the grading and getting the correct grading quantities to mitigate the landslide. I've also got the architect here and the project geologist if there are any specific questions about the geology, the grading, et cetera.
Charles, thank you very much. You still got 13 minutes of rebuttal time if anybody wants to object. Sarah, would you like to speak?
Sarah Wan, good evening, Chair Euring and other commissioners. I'm here tonight not in my professional capacity, but as a friend of the Conheims. They used to live in Malibu. We met about 35 years ago. We've been friends ever since, and they've been wanting to move back for a long time. I still consider them my neighbors, even though they're not living here right now, but they will. I realize that who people are doesn't really make a difference. That's not what you're looking at. But it's what the development is that matters to you. But it does matter that this is their dream home. This isn't a spec home, so you can be sure of that. And one that they're going to live in and enjoy. But most probably what's important to you is that the Conheims have followed the law. They have met all of the requirements. And what's interesting is that they're the ones who came to your staff about the grading issue, okay? They didn't do what they could have done, or what some people do is they didn't start. They had a permit. They could have just started the development and then went, oops. They could have hidden the amount of grading, or they could have said, okay, oops, we're in the middle of it. Now we're gonna let you know when it's not, there's nothing you can do. Well, they didn't do that because that's not who they are, and that's the reason I'm here tonight, is because I really respect them, and I hope that you will be able to approve this project and welcome them to this community, because that's what I want to do, because they're going to be great assets to Malibu. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you very much. Okay, does anybody else would like to speak on this subject? Otherwise, we'll turn it back over to the applicant. Anybody? Charles, any other further comments? Okay, let me close public hearing, bring it back up to the commission table. Commissioners.
My question?
John?
This is for staff. I've been in here a long time, and I haven't seen something come back with this huge difference in numbers. And also, not just the grading, but we went from a standard wastewater system to some kind of percolation system, which means there's something, there is a landslide. So how did we get, and apparently it was reviewed by the same staff person in the city at the time. How do we get so far off, and what do we do to keep it from happening again? Because as far as I'm concerned, when I studied this the first time, I had certain facts to deal with, and now I have different facts. But it seems like they're way off, and somebody should have said at the time, there's a landslide here. You can't percolate, or 900 cubic yards isn't quite right. How does that happen?
So you have two issues there, one being the septic design and the second being the amount of remedial grading. So my understanding on the septic system, and they can further clarify this, it was an applicant-driven change. It had, it was a separate issue from the grading. The grading, when we spoke to the city geologist, what they look for in the planning stages is not so much the quantity, but what has to happen. So the geotechnical reports did indicate the on-site landslide and the geological conditions, and that hasn't changed through the in this amendment or since the original report. And their project engineer can discuss that as well. So our geologist knew the depth that they needed to go, and also the areas were identified. However, it's not as simple as just a box and length times width times height, and you get a volume. The landslide varies in depth. It's not a continuous depth, but Chris did know the maximum. So what the city geologist looks for in the planning stages of a project is, one, is there a geotechnical issue on the property? And there was. How deep and what is the recommended remediation? And is remedial grading appropriate? It's now the next question is how much remedial grading? Now, their engineer at the time gave an estimation that was grossly inaccurate, but that wasn't caught because that wasn't being reviewed. It's during the plan check stages that the final calculations come in, and then that's when this issue became apparent. So unfortunately, it's not something that we would catch unless we asked for final engineering, is my understanding from our geotechnical staff. And final engineering, it's usually a larger investment, and it's not something that's typical until you actually have that ability to build and you spend that kind of money and you're in plan check.
So this project never went to plan check?
Correct, it's getting ready for plan check.
But I mean, the original one that was done, the first.
Yeah, at the planning, we refer to the process leading up to the planning commission's approval, or if it's an administrative thing, my approval, as the planning stage. And so that is basically it's the land use entitlements, and then it's a certain amount of the technical review of the rest of the project.
Right.
But it doesn't get into the actual construction level documents. That's, as Richard explained, a more expensive.
So this never went to that second stage?
I believe it was when they were getting ready to go through plan check that they identified this issue.
Right. We didn't catch it, okay.
Right.
Yes, that's correct. So they were looking for what would have been the next step after the planning commission approval, which would have been a green stamp on their plans. And it's as they were creating those technical drawings, this problem came to light. I want to say it was around July of last year when they first approached me with just the grading issues, because they knew that they were going to have a problem getting our, I don't want to say in-concept stamp, but that go-ahead stamp into plan check. So I haven't stamped anything for this project to get into an engineering review.
Okay.
Well, Richard, what I'm concerned about is not that it was sort of off. I'm concerned about the fact that our geologist didn't even bother to look at it. So you're saying that his job, when we get it in the planning department, is just to say, oh, there's a landslide there and there's remedial grading, and I'll use the numbers they have. But in this case, we have 5,174 cubic yards of import. That makes a difference when we consider a project, if there's that many trucks running up and down the street, et cetera. The same thing with the, as you say, they brought up having the different water disposal system. If they hadn't brought it up, would we just have dumped water into a landslide? And where's, I can understand being off 100% off, but not 1,000% off. Is there any checks and balances on that? Or when we get a staff report, it's just whatever the applicant says, and if it seems like it's close, it's okay?
So the wastewater system, to my knowledge, the previous design didn't have an issue. So I think that's a separate issue here. The main issue is the jump in grading. And unless there's a change in what's required, but the checks and balances that they came back to us with a grading table, staff observed the difference in numbers, and the Planning Commission was the approval body for that, and the check was to bring, we looked at it, and now we bring it back to you so that there's evaluation by the Planning Department, by the Planning Commission. Because without this change in grading, I don't believe that they'll be able to move forward with the project. So it's not that this will take place in a vacuum. It comes back for a public hearing.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I'm just talking about the first time around. Now, would the original engineer that did this, would he be put on any kind of list? Or you better check his stuff?
The geologist is aware of it. Building and safety knows. And my guess too is there's probably been some discussion on the private side as well.
Okay, so unless, if we get a lot of them that are 999 cubic yards grading, if they come back and say, oh gee, it's 1,200, do we get it back?
If they come in, and I believe what you're referring to is a non-exempt number, because everybody seems to come in just under the 1,000, the answer is yes. Because the moment they go over 1,000, it requires a variance, which would require approval from the city's planning commission.
Thank you.
If I can sort of,
Let me just add one thing to John's, and I understand where John's coming from. You know, and we get traffic reports, okay, that you read the traffic report and you say, it appears that the purpose of a traffic report is to support whatever the applicant's trying to do. I've gone through photometric analysis reports for field lights, okay, where it says, don't worry, Stevie Boy is going to stop at 300 yards. It's never going to, and you say, okay, well, that didn't work out. So it just becomes, you know, we want to do the right thing, all right? I mean, I think that's what we're trying to do, and sort of making sure we're getting the information we need to do that, I think is John's concern, and I'm sure we'll work on this as we move forward.
Chair Euring, for this type of issue, there is a built-in protection for the commission in terms of it really puts the onus on the applicant to make sure that it's right, because if they submit it wrong, you see what happens. They have to come back to the commission, and they could very well lose their project. So
yeah, but if they hadn't come back and done something and identified it was wrong, they probably could have got it built, and we would have. So
the idea is they would be checked eventually.
I understand their checks and balances. I'm just sort of reflecting as you sit up here and you look at this stuff. You want to say, you know, do I give it 100% stamp of approval? Is it 50%? And we'll learn as we go along. Commissioner Hill, you're up.
yeah, I'll take another few nibbles at the same apple, see if we get any further. The staff report says that the delay is caused by the redesign, and that constitutes due cause. And I think normally I would say, well, that's a mistake that's on them, that really isn't a due cause, but it does sound like it's in good faith here. So there's some credit there, and I don't know what kind of discretion flows from that. But that then makes me wonder about, okay, if we can allow that extension and call that due cause, there's all these additional discretionary changes that are coming in, moving the buildings around a little bit, changing the crawl space to a basement and the garage, and that to me starts to get difficult because it's sort of a fuzzy, almost a piecemealing kind of thing where it's like, well, we took one stab at it and it wasn't quite what we wanted, so let's find a little error or something and bring it back, or I don't know what. So it comes down to a question of what is is there any sort of bright line between a revised application and a new application?
There is a there's not a bright line for that, but it is not at all unusual for a project to make some little adjustments as it goes from the planning stage to the plan check stage. Sometimes it's because they realize, oh my gosh, that's going to be enormously expensive. I want to do this or that instead. Sometimes it's just a preference. It can be any number of things. And so if they're it doesn't change the entire nature of the project, then we'll process an amendment. The extension is and while we've brought them together at the same time to you, there are separate findings for each one, and they're really, I think, unrelated because you could address one independent of the other. I don't think it's likely that somebody would go to the extent of creating a quote-unquote error in order to justify an extension, but I could be surprised, I guess, but.
It makes me nervous that the slide was known about, and I guess John has said it already, the difference, it's like 12 times as much grading as was originally specified.
Well, as Richard mentioned, it's not typically the level of detail that the city geologist reviews at this stage. If there are future instances of remedial grading where the commission is processing a site plan review, we can make a point of, taking a close look at what the quantities are, and if, ask the city geologist to look at that and see if that seems to fit the circumstances. But ultimately, it's the consulting geologist's responsibility to make the recommendations, and that's what gets reviewed in more detail during plan check.
So how many of the new changes flow directly from that new understanding about the grading, and how much are just sort of like, well, since we're changing it, we might as well change some more stuff?
To my understanding, they're really elective changes. They're minor changes that the property owners decided are preferable for the project. I don't think there's anything kind of deceitful or anything like that going on here. They ran into a project delay because they had to redesign grading. They had to come back to the commission to get an amendment to address that. It's kind of like, if you have to go back anyway, you might as well perfect the project to get it exactly the way you want. I don't think there's any. Am I making sense? Because I don't think if they had to come back anyway, why not tweak it the way they exactly wanted to?
Okay, it's just.
They might not have bothered to do the amendment if they had for the project changes if they hadn't had to come back anyway. I don't know. That you might ask them that question, but.
Well, if the direction is towards moving ahead, I would have some other questions, but maybe we should hear from others first.
Yeah, I did want to kind of piggyback on what's being said here. So this is a little different than normal. We kind of got two things to consider: the extension and then largely a grading change and some minor changes to the project. It does seem kind of like this approach of kind of, allowing this tweaking in the context kind of opens up a door where, in the future, other applicants could kind of use a similar, kind of bundle it all together. I just want to be as clear as we can. If someone could state to us, I know it's written in the staff report, but just say what we should consider. Like, since the grading is changing, we obviously want to look at those numbers. Since the size of the construction is changing, do we consider the overall size of the project or only the limited scope of that reduction in size? Where do we keep focused on in terms of when making our decision?
I think in this case, you have sort of two separate issues. One is whether there's due cause for the extension, but you're also looking at the amendment to the CDP, the proposed amendment. And in terms of the amendment, it's just a CDP, or is there a site plan review for the grading, right? So that's what you're considering if you want to approve the amendment, would be whether the site plan review for the grading should be approved, whether you can make the findings for that, and the general CDP findings for the rest of the project, which includes some other minor changes to the basement and the swales.
When considering the SPR for the grading is to correctly support the structure which is being requested. So does that then say for the review of that site plan review, we should consider all aspects of the project? Or
Just to clarify about the
change in
grading,
grading?
and I'll ask the consulting geologist to speak to this. My understanding is that the remedial grading is not related to the structure itself, but the landslide on the site. The remedial grading does not occur in the same location as the residence.
But to allow the structure to be there, the grading has to be
To
changed.
make the site safe, yes, but the grading would be required to be there regardless of whether the design of the house was changed at this stage or not.
And so I'm trying to sort of parse this. At this point in time, I mean, you're looking at the amendment, you know, what they're proposing to change to it, the remedial grading and the other minor changes, and whether you can make the findings for a site plan review for the remedial grading, or whether you can make it for the CDP for the changes to the project. Because the rest of the project has already been approved. You're not reopening that, so you're looking at that in the amendment. In terms of the extension, you're looking at whether there's separate due cause. You're not reopening the findings for that original project. So they're two separate things, but they are probably tied together, since in this case, they would have issues if I don't think you could approve the amendment. You can't approve the amendment if you're not going to give them an extension as well, because they would have an expired project.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Anybody else? Questions?
I have a staff question. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I thought we were going to hear about some.
Did you want him to address where the remedial grading is going?
I was interested in having Jake clarify unless I said it perfectly correctly, whether the landslide is related to how the house is built or if it's just related to other site conditions.
Yeah, I think but if you'd like to comment on that.
Oh, yeah, sure. The PowerPoint up too, there's a slide that I wanted to pull up that I think will help illustrate the amount and the size of the landslide.
Parker, can you put up the applicant's presentation?
Yes, my name is Jake Holt, Project Geologist, Land Phases Incorporated. Yeah, in regards to the mitigation of the landslide, you know, the site is in a very complex area. Almost 100% of the property is in a landslide area. And the landslide limits, geometry, depth have been always known. And our great, you know, city geologist, Mr. Dean, he reviewed those thoroughly and approved the project. The amount of the mitigation that we were recommending for stabilizing some of the landslides to promote drainage and for the drainage facilities and to prepare the building pad have always been the same. The problem here between 2016 and now was the accounting of it by the prior civil engineer. So the amount of grading we were recommending that was in the plans, that's going to be in the final plans, has not changed. It's just the prior engineer did not add up those numbers correctly and properly understand the geologic report in their yardage quantity reporting. So the new civil engineer has obviously corrected that and got the exact amount that we're recommending that Chris Dean has reviewed and approved. So it's just giving a proper accounting of the numbers. And, you know, regardless of, you know, house size and location on this property, that mitigative grading that we're recommending is not going to change. It needs to be done. And if we fail to do this mitigative grading, then there's risk of this landslide moving and failing down onto Malibu Road, and it'll always be a nuisance, you know, for the remainder of this property's life. And Planning Director Blue, yes, she is correct that the grading is not being provided to stabilize the house location. The house and the structures are being stabilized via soldier pile system that's going to pin the property, and the grading is purely as actually being minimized as much as possible in order to correct some of these superficial landslides and to promote the proper drainage and to provide for the drainage facilities which are required on the site to produce a safe and stable building site.
Thank you very much.
One last point too, I'd like to just respond to Mr. Mazza's question about the septic system. This will clear that up. There has been, this was a specially designed on-site wastewater system specifically located in the stabilized area of the property, and as recommended, these facilities are going to on the north side of the residence behind the stability corridor of the soldier piles. The only change that was between 2016 and now as part of this application is that the treatment tank has been relocated. So the system has not had any change since 2016. It's just the tank was relocated as recommended to be behind the house in a more safe and stable environment because of the landslide conditions of the site.
While we've
questions
got
of
you up
Jake
here.
as well. Yeah, if you want to go ahead.
Have we ever heard, and what is how many truckloads of cut and fill might be coming and going from this? Is that something that's been on anybody's radar?
Approximately about 54. There's 549 cubic yards of import.
Okay.
And I believe that in the staff report, there's a requirement for a traffic management plan when that, okay?
But that was fill how much cut going out? Or is it just fill coming in?
This grading yard verification can be a bit confusing, but to really figure out the total amount of import or export, you have to go to the bottom right corner of the table where you have your total import and total export. You have to subtract the two. So when you subtract the 5361 minus the 4812, you get the 549 of import. That's how you come up with that number.
The staff
There's actually less import now than was previously approved. There was more import on the project by the prior engineer, but that doesn't mean much because we don't really.
The staff report on 5 of 17 says there's 5,174 cubic yards of import.
Which page is that, John?
That's,
9 of 17.
that's based on the table on, yeah, that's the page, I'm not making sense. Okay, you're looking at page 9, table 3. What Charles is saying is that you get the correct number of import if you go over one column and take that 5361 and subtract the 4812.
Now,
And that
let
gives
me
you
ask
a
you
net.
this. You're importing dirt. It's coming from another site, right?
Right.
Right? So that's 5,361 cubic yards coming in.
No, they have 4,800 that's would have been exported, but they just bring it to their side of the property.
Yeah, the net.
Well, the export, though, you're going to keep on the property.
Correct, and that'll net against
Is
the
that,
import.
well, why would it net? You still have to bring in 5,361 cubic yards driving down the highway, right?
No.
No? Okay, then
So-
I'm wrong, and I don't care.
All right.
No,
Take that answer, that's good. Commissioner Hill, you have any more questions?
we need a scientist to
keep-
clarify this
Go
table.
ahead.
Into a little bit different realm here.
I'll come back, yeah. I'm trying to,
I've sort of brought this up before, and I want to try to get a better answer this time. I see 3 or 4 habitable buildings. I see, you could count it at 4 if you, I don't know what that gallery between the two bits constitutes, but if we call it one building, then 3 habitable buildings. This looks like a compound that would require CEQA review and beyond the scope of a 15303 exemption. And I asked this before on another project, and they said, well, that doesn't apply because this is urban, it's not rural, and so we don't have to look at that. But I wonder about that because, you know, all the founding documents of the city talk about Malibu's rural character, and we've got ESHA on 2 sides of this. So it seems a stretch to me to be saying it's urban, so we don't need to look at that category of CEQA. So again, how is it that a project like this does not require that review?
This is one large single-family dwelling. It's not 3 or 4. It has an unusual design, but it is one single-family dwelling. The basis for the CEQA exemption, the categorical exemption, has to do with how the census considers whether an area is urban or rural specifically. And so, for, you know, agree or disagree, Malibu is considered an urbanized area under that definition.
Okay. I guess I have a few other questions then while I've got the mic.
Can I bug Jake just
Yeah,
quick? Sorry.
yeah.
Do you mind, Steve?
no, go right ahead.
All right. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify. So, in what you stated was that if they did none of this remedial work, that lot would be at more risk of a slide, and even if they built nothing on it, by doing the remedial work you're recommending, will stabilize that lot for kind of the benefit of Malibu Road. Yeah.
Yes and no. I got the remedial grading that's planned by itself would fix some of the superficial landslides. It's not going to give the entire property a code-conforming factor of safety. It's designed to work in tandem with the residence construction, which involves soldier piles and stabilization and proper drainage control. But the remedial grading is necessary in order to facilitate, the proper drainage, to go work in concert with the stabilization system, and to provide for the required drainage facilities in order to properly move water safely off the hill and not infiltrate, which would be, again, a stability hazard. So the property is going to be safe and stable in terms of the building sites and the graded areas, and it'll be in a far more stable situation than it presently exists at the time.
Okay, so then generally speaking, the soldier piles aren't really changing as far as where the structure is, just your team recognized they needed more remedial to make that other area around more stable.
Well, yes, we've always known, and we've always had the recommendation for the remedial grading, meaning the correction of the superficial landslides and that surround kind of the residence. We've always known what we had to do and recommended that. Again, it's just the civil engineering accounting of it was, they didn't add their numbers correctly.
Okay, I got it.
And also to, support the city geologist too, it's not his job to check those numbers. As a city geologist, he, just like me, we don't quantify grading, and it's beyond our scope to verify those grading numbers. We're relying, as Chris is relying, on the experts and the plans that are given before him. It would have been caught with the checks and balances on the plan check, just as our internal team, our checks and balances caught it before resubmitting.
And then my last question, Mr. Holtz, and anyone else might be able to help here, just on the history, it looks like there were some homes that had been there in, 72? I don't know how that landslide impacted. Any knowledge of what happened to those residences, or if they were impacted by that landslide, what happened?
Yeah.
They were burned down in the fire.
Yeah, there was a single-family residence, I think in the 70s. I don't know exactly which fire, but it burned by fire.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Back on the geology still, just so I understand about the safety and integrity of the plan. The idea is that the piles will reach into the bedrock such that if this landslide even started moving, it would hypothetically move through the piles and the house would stay where it is.
You're correct.
Okay, and how far do the piles have to reach the bedrock here?
Oh, that's the details.
Speaking to the question, I'm sorry, of just the strength of them.
Yeah, on average, again, that's the details of the final structural plans, which, we're still, I think they're still in process, but in general, it's, a simple way to look at it is you double the depth. If the landslide is 30 feet deep, the piles are going to be 60 feet deep. I mean, that's the generality of it, but sometimes they're more, sometimes they're less, but that's the general thought, is to embed the minimum required amount to withstand the driving forces to produce a safe and stable building site.
Commissioner Hill and Commissioner, I just want to make sure that we focus on what was applied for in the amendment. Right. We're not reopening, the original residence that was approved.
Well, there have been changes with the basement and the grading and all, so that just seemed like maybe that's affected by that.
I just want to be careful that we're laying a record that we're looking at the amendment that was proposed.
Okay.
Are we getting close to a motion, guys?
I got one more question.
I have two other minor little things. It looked like the landscaping plan, the trees in the atrium were packed in pretty tight next to the house. I don't know if that's something that you'd have to make any sort of condition on, but that's something I'd be aware of. And finally, the boundary shows a 6-foot chain link fence all the way around. I understood that, well, we had a chain link fence at my house and we were required to take it down as being illegal in some way. So I don't know how you plan for a chain link fence in this day and age.
Is there a chain link fence there?
I saw that spec'd on a plan.
Not existing, there's no chain link fence. I think there was one proposed on the site plan, that's still shown on the site plan. And there probably will be one during construction. I imagine that's a requirement.
Oh, it's just a construction fence? Okay.
I believe so.
We'll put it in the resolution, yeah.
Okay, John, you got one more?
Yeah, these are, Richard, I just want to see if these are in the resolution. They are supposed, according to the geological review sheet, they're supposed to have a dewatering well and an inclinometer plan for review. And I wondered if that is in here. And also, they're supposed to have the drip dispersal field shall perk no deeper than the root zone. I wondered if those two requirements are in our resolution as a condition.
I'm sorry, is the question that those conditions are still included?
Are they in our conditions?
I will have to
Because
check.
this is coming from the recommendation of the geological review sheet.
We don't typically itemize all of the plan check stage review comments from the geotechnical referral. There's a condition in the beginning of the resolution that says that, let's see. That basically it's, yeah, that all the number 9, and this condition carries over to the amended project. All development shall conform to the requirements of all the departments, including city geotechnical staff. So whether we put that in the resolution or not, they're subject to the requirements that are listed here. But
They would have to meet those conditions. It's number
Yeah, it's
8 in the
included
new
by reference,
resolution.
yeah, we don't typically write all of these out because
So,
there are pages and pages
for
of them.
example, when Steve asked for a check sheet on Whole Foods, there's a check sheet that would say, where's the inclinometer? And there'd be a check sheet saying this doesn't drip below the root line?
That's a plan check stage comment. It's not something that we typically include in the.
No,
planning
but I'm
commission
just
resolution.
asking, when the project's final,
Somebody's going to check it.
somebody's
Yes.
gonna check those two things?
Yes.
It's not lost in all this paperwork.
No, that'll be part of the city geologist review.
Okay?
Okay, I move the staff's recommendation
Can I
for
get
approval.
Can I get a second? I'll second it.
Okay, call for a vote.
And, you know, just from my perspective, if I were building the house, okay, it seems to me we had the problem with the grading, but if I had that come before me and I had a chance to go back and fix some things in my house to make it better before it got built, I think I'd be doing the same thing those guys were doing. So, I mean, I go back to Bunny, I don't sense anything nefarious was going on to get this done, but that's just one man's opinion.
Yeah, at the same time, though, we do want to counsel against coming up with sort of half-baked things and deciding to change it.
Yeah, but this is the first, this is
Yeah.
one. I mean, it's not
This
like
is one,
there's a
but-
train
Yeah, there's not a
coming
train.
after us, yeah.
Well, and
Go
I just,
And I'd like to ask one last question, Richard. Richard, I'm sorry, is the quarter acre requirement on fence in effect? Or does it have to be taken off that plan? Does it say you have to follow section so-and-so and so-and-so? Because it's on that, we're approving the plans by approving.
The applicant cannot enclose more than, I think it's a half acre.
Half acre.
It's in the code, and they wouldn't be able to, the only way they could get a stay on that would be if a variance was processed, and no variance was processed.
Okay.
So we got a
I
motion
would
and a
ask-
second, we've got a question from Commissioner Marks.
maybe a friendly amendment. I know a lot of the times we've come up against 2-year extensions. We've talked about a shorter duration for the complexity of this project. Are we thinking we just give the full 2 years?
I give them the two, this thing, this
Yeah,
is
it's a
still,
monster.
yeah, this is a monster.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Kathleen, can we get a roll call, please?
Is the amendment duration going to match the 2-year extension?
There is no amendment. It was just a conversation then. No.
I believe it is gonna coincide pretty closely, because the expiration date is in May, right? Yeah, they applied very early for
Okay.
this.
Kathleen?
Commissioner Mazza,
Yes.
Chair Euring,
Yes.
Commissioner Hill,
Yes.
Commissioner Marks,
Yes.
motion carries.
Gentlemen, thank you very, very much.
Incidentally, the fencing condition is in the original resolution, so that carries over.
Excellent. Excellent. We've got, Justine, thank you very much. Appreciate your help. We're gonna move on to item 5B. Everybody's leaving us. Everybody was here for that one house. It's amazing. All right. Thank you all for coming. All right, huh? Yeah. Oh, it's going to be, I mean, it's a great view. All right, let's move on to item 5B. Coastal Development Permit number 18030 and minor mod numbers 18017, 19003, an application for the interior and exterior remodel of an addition to an existing one-story single-family residence and associated development at 6810 Wildlife Road. Disclosures. Anybody? John?
On Friday, I met with Steve Uring and Lester Tobias.
I think it was Thursday.
Thursday?
Yeah.
And very, very briefly with Chris Farrer. And learned nothing. It wasn't in the staff report.
I had a short call with the applicant Lester Tobias, didn't learn anything outside the staff report.
What John said, we did meet with Lester and sort of got a view of the site. Didn't learn anything that wasn't already included in the staff report. So with that, let us get a staff report from Jessica, if you could.
Good evening. Thank you, members of the commission. Next item on the agenda is the coastal development permit for 6810 Wildlife Road. The property is located on the east side of Wildlife Road in the rural residential 1 acre zoning district and is approximately half an acre in size. The project before you tonight consists of an interior and exterior remodel of an existing single-family residence, including 11.5% demolition of exterior walls, a 784 square foot attached second residential unit, new swimming pool, spa, hardscaping, and demolition of an existing storage shed. The project also consists of a minor modification for a 16% reduction in the front yard setback and a minor modification for a 20% reduction in the required cumulative side yard setback. The floor plan shows the proposed attached second residential unit in blue. The second unit is sited behind the existing 2-car garage and will not exceed 15 feet 5 inches in height. As shown on the site plan, the property has an existing non-conforming 10% side yard setback on the north side. As no addition is proposed on that side, and as the project proposes a less than 50% demolition of exterior walls, the property is allowed to maintain the existing non-conforming side yard setback. Although the proposed second unit is sited slightly behind the existing garage, the second unit does not meet the current front yard setback requirement and as such requires the minor modification for a reduction. Additionally, although the proposed second unit meets the 15% setback, it does not meet the required 25% cumulative side yard setback and therefore requires a minor modification for that as well. The property owner installed story poles on March 22nd to show the visual impacts of the proposed second unit from Wildlife Road. As previously stated, the proposed second unit will not exceed 15 feet 5 inches in height, and staff has not received any correspondence regarding the project. During a site visit, Commissioner Mazza and Chair Uring requested that the applicant revise the plans to show the cars on the site plan and to remove the sleeping loft on the plans. Those plans have been revised and submitted to the Planning Department. In summary, staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt Resolution 1928, approving the project as conditioned, and this concludes my presentation, and the applicant and staff are available for questions.
Jessica, thank you very much. We have questions.
Yeah, Jessica, when you mentioned the car, that's the 5th car spot, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. No questions.
Commissioner Hill? Okay. Commissioner Marks, anything you got ahead of time?
No, thank you.
All right, we have one speaker slip, Lester Tobias. You are speaking for the applicant, and you have 15 minutes.
Good evening. I do not have much to say. Alex, can you turn on the PowerPoint, please? Okay. Thanks. All right, and I always get the clicker thing wrong. Okay, so this is a fairly straightforward project. It's not 10,000 square feet. There's no grading. I don't have any team behind me. It's a whopping 750 square feet. It's less than 18 feet. So, we can all go catch the second half of the Sharks Avalanche game if we're smart about this. I want to, Alex, this is not good. That's not good. Can you help me, Alex, or not? Is that just how it came out to you?
Was it upside down?
It's squished. The orientation is incorrect.
It's upside down.
No, it's supposed to rotate right. Doesn't, you know what, again, what I really wanted to make a point of, and I'm not going to be able to now, is that this was a perfect example of an existing house, older house in Malibu, where you have these non-conforming conditions in a wing of the house that you can't really slice off. I mean, and unfortunately, because somehow when you send these PowerPoints and they do this, I can't really show it to you with any certainty, so I'm just going to kick back and answer questions. Thank you.
Lester, thank you very much. You've got 13 and a half minutes in case. Anybody else like to speak on this topic? Otherwise, we'll close to public comment. Nobody? Okay, public comment is closed. It's back up to the table. John.
Jessica, based on that last diagram, how does the fifth car enter its parking spot? Is it a wider entrance?
There is at the opening of Wildlife Road, there's a wide entrance up there. Right now, there's one side that has a bunch of mulch in it, and you might remember from your site visit when you were out there.
So if you drive in, you just drive in straight, you don't have to...
Yeah, there was a car parked there actually when I did my site visit.
Okay. That's it.
Okay, Commissioner Gill.
Okay. And this might be for Lester, but on the geotechnical review sheet, it's called, the new addition is 855 square feet. Somewhere else it's called, in the staff report, it's called 784. Public Works review sheet says it's 846. Waterworks says 806. Is the house slowly breathing in and out?
Well, we're going to come back for an amended CDP, and no, the issue I think is what happened was Jessica, and well, I have a completely different opinion of how we interpret some of our grandfathering rules, and let's just say I lost that discrepancy, that square footage, by having to pull the house in from the side yard. You know, I chose not to fight.
Okay. So what's the real number?
Well, yeah, now it's 754.
That wasn't even on my list.
784.
Yeah, 784.
Thank you, Jessica.
I'm not going to fight that
don't,
either, man.
Don't even start. Right, go ahead.
Speaking of the side yard and the minor mod for the setbacks, I wonder what the implications are of the north side that has the 4.4-foot property line, and you need the 5 feet fire department walk around over there, and you've got a bunch of shrubs there. What does the fire department say there? They're happy with that?
You want to take this?
And does that 5-foot walk around have to be on their property, or it could just be if they cut those trees down, some of them, so the fire guys could get in there? The fact that they're partly on the other property is no big deal.
The house is legal non-conforming with the north side yard setback, so it was approved at one time. I'm not sure, I'd have to look at it, but probably during the county days. And since no work is being done there and they're not over the 50% demolition, the city is not going to require them to remove part of the house on that side.
And the fire department doesn't update there? Okay.
The fire department reviewed this project and approved it.
Last question. Stormwater conditions. You've got you don't want to be discharging chlorinated water or anything that's sensitive there. What happens when inevitably it rains really hard and the pool overflows? Is there some provision for that?
The existing site drainage conditions, the entire site slopes to the southeast, and there is an existing like retention swale, but ultimately it goes off the property. So, but the Public Works is requiring, they'll require stormwater retention plans, SWWPs, which we will be submitting, with the building plans.
Because there's something about it being a sensitive area in terms of chemicals getting out and
well, also when you have a swimming pool, it's just a standard requirement that you can't drain your swimming pool.
Right.
You can't drain it anywhere. You got to take it and pump it out in reverse, like Eli Jr. kind of tanks and stuff.
I guess I just asked because we've had a pool in the past. We burned in the fire, whatever.
Yeah.
But, and it would periodically overflow, and, you know, this was old and grandfathered, so we didn't worry about where that chlorinated water went. But here, that's something that happens, so I just wonder.
Well, I mean, that would be a question you'd probably have to ask to every pool that came before you, you know, as opposed to just our little poor pool in a 750 square foot,
Yeah.
one-story addition,
Well-
no grading.
So do we care?
Well, no, I don't, but Lester, is this gonna be a chlorinated pool or an ozonated pool or a saltwater pool?
Honestly, John, at this point, I don't know.
Yeah, most people don't use chlorine anymore.
All right, Commissioner Marks.
Don't have anything.
Anybody got a motion?
I move we approve as staff requests.
I second.
All, Jessica?
Second.
That's staff's recommendation.
Recommendation.
Jessica, Kathleen, give us a roll call.
Commissioner Mazza?
Sorry.
Yes.
It's okay. Commissioner Hill?
Yes.
Commissioner Marks?
Yes.
Chair Euring?
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you.
Move we adjourn.
Thank you, Lester, for getting rid of that second story.
Second?
And the loft. I move we adjourn.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.